Now,
Hi, Carla.
I want to go straight to the US Democratic primaries. Bernie Sanders has swept Nevada, picking up all 7 delegates with a total vote of 46%. Joe Biden was trailing him with 23%, but did not receive the support of any delegates. In total, Bernie Sanders now has 28 delegates, followed by Pete Buttigieg with 22 and Elizabeth Warren in third with 8. But of course, this could all change on Super Tuesday. Catherine, I want to start with you. Bernie Sanders seems to be soaring ahead. He's adopting very similar messages to Trump, don't you think?
Yeah, and Karl Rove warned about this last year, Shari. He's always considered Sanders had a populist appeal, in that while the Democratic Party elite don't like him and are worried that he could trash the brand if he's ultimately the nominee, he does actually speak a language of economic nationalism. While he's avowedly a democratic socialist, and some would say a genuine socialist, his America First economic messages appeal to some of the old Democratic Party base that had started to feel disenfranchised by the liberalisation of the Democratic Party after the civil rights era. That's been a long-term trend for them. So he's got a populist level of appeal. But the interesting thing about Nevada too, there's a couple of things that are really worth making before we throw to Kyla, is this was actually the turning point when Hillary turned the tables on him in 2016, Hillary Clinton. This was a tough state for him. Two things about it that are ominous for Super Tuesday. While the delegate count is low, there are a substantial number of Hispanic voters in Nevada, and that was always the mythology around Biden's candidacy, that he had appealed to minority voters, African American and Hispanics. Sanders is just giving an inkling that he's turning some of those predictions on their head. So I think he's looming as a really serious threat to be the nominee.
Kyla, what do you think in terms of who would actually be best placed from the Democrats' perspective to beat Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think many of the commentators that have talked up, Bernie Sanders as the best candidate probably have it right in many regards, because as Catherine said, he really does speak in a way to that, to that audience of people who are disaffected with the major parties, and that just seems to be a very large trend in America these days, if not, obviously around the world, in Europe and in the UK and all of that as well. So I think, in a way, what Donald Trump's strength is, it seems to me, is to belittle almost and just completely make redundant lots of traditional, political candidates. I mean, if you have a look at him up against Hillary Clinton, on paper she was, a statesman for the United States. She had, a lot of experience in terms of politics. She had a very well-funded campaign. All of these things, and of course that came to naught. So I think we're in kind of a landscape where you put up a traditional candidate, even someone like, Mike Bloomberg, and it'll be a very disappointing experience for the Democrats.
Well, let's talk about Bloomberg. Catherine, why do you think he performed so poorly in his first debate, his first entry into this race? Because he obviously wasn't there in the first couple.
Well, he's made a strategic decision that he'll put all his eggs in the basket later. I think probably, I think it's an overused term, but Sanders really does have the momentum on the Democratic side now. He was probably disappointed in his own performance in New Hampshire and then came out of Iowa with virtually a tie. But he's run a pretty decent campaign. I have never taken Bloomberg as seriously as a lot of the commentariat. I think he's got a lot of vulnerabilities amongst registered Democrats because he started life as a Republican, and has a niche appeal on a law and order candidacy as Mayor of New York. He suffers from, in an era where polarisation over wealth distribution and people feeling left behind, another billionaire running. I think he's got a lot of vulnerabilities, and I've never thought he's a particularly charismatic or attractive candidate. I think I think Sanders would be an absolute disaster for the United States and for the Western Alliance, but I think it's his to lose from here. I really think so.
Well, it's fascinating that
as I said, I think Biden was overestimated in terms of his appeal with especially African Americans in the South.
It's fascinating that the two front runners now, if you say, you know, Sanders is the front runner, that they're polar opposites. You've got the socialist Bernie Sanders and Mike Bloomberg, who's, you know, one of the world's richest people. And if you have had a look at the betting market, Sanders is at about $1.80 and Bloomberg is coming in at second at $5. So he's getting ahead.
But not their numbers amongst Democrat-leaning voters, Shari.
Interesting.
Bloomberg's nowhere with registered Democrats. Like, it's 72% favourability according to an NBC poll I looked at today, and 64% Biden. The rest of them are daylight. So
it'll be a similar
win Democratic voters first.
Yeah, and it'll be a similar situation probably to, you know, how it was with Trump, where the Republican Party really had to be dragged and reluctantly supported Trump. And, you know, as you referenced before, that's probably going to be a similar case with Bernie Sanders and the Democrats.